Much everyone who's stuck around meeting. Who met someone new during that session? Oh yes, that's what these sessions are all about. Outside of the fantastic knowledge that we glean off of our fantastic presenters, it is about trying to leverage off of Adelaide having very few degrees of separation, and being able to connect with people to actually get things done, get things rolling, and creating good things. So once again, like I said, this is the portion that we get to let it all fly loose. And I've seen that Alice and Pia, you both have chosen to have a non-pullback hairstyle, so then you can fling it wherever you want. Is that the? That's all.
That's what we're both thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how I'd go about it as well. But just to make sure that we get things on the right track, we try to, make sure we have a little bit of conversation up here, and then I do want to make sure we have an opportunity to bring you all into the conversation. So if you had any questions from their fantastic presentations, that's a fantastic opportunity to ask it. And then I also want to acknowledge that we do try to have a little bit of back and forth. So we do also acknowledge that in our network, there's a lot of people that know different kind of things, different parts of the puzzle. So if you'd like to even make a comment or get the direct conversation in a certain direction, just make sure you raise your hand. The best way to make sure you can ask your question is you look straight into my eyes with a bit of desire to ask a question. Okay? All right. Well, with that setup, hello. Welcome back to the main stage. I know you've been sitting on the spotlight for a while, so you're like, when are these questions going to start firing? But I'm always quite fascinated by anyone's backstory that works in sustainability. Some of y'all youngins that might all have already stepped directly into sustainability. There once was a day that you didn't step right into sustainability. You kind of had a meandering track. And it is good to know where people have kind of come from into the realm of climate action, sustainability, driving good outcomes. So I wanted to ask the both of you if you can kind of give us a little bit of flavor of what's been your professional journey, and what kind of led you into the space of sustainability. Whoever would like to go first.
I think I just got the shits with things and wanted to make some change.
Oh,
so we'll just start the conversation right there, because it is a Tuesday night. I'm a STEM graduate, so environmental science, worked in carbon offsetting on country for a long time, set up what biosequestration was and ACCUs, and did that kind of stuff. Thought I was making a difference. Did some great shared value partnerships with Qantas and Virgin, and did all this stuff that I thought would create change, and then didn't quite get to where we wanted it to in terms of market approach. Worked in political advocacy here and in Canberra, looking at nature conservation and community action, and then climate action. And I was telling someone earlier, had the wonderful job here in South Australia of being a facilitator for the State Planning Act reform.
Oh, nice.
Which was a very boring and long and methodical journey.
So not so nice.
And I learned a bunch of stuff about stuff that I didn't know before I knew it. And through that process, I got into sustainability much more heavily. So less about circularity in the economy and more about residential assets. And what I learned was there's a bunch of great people here in South Australia that have an enormous wealth of knowledge, who already have the solutions, already have the knowledge on how to build great communities. And we already have those assets and that IP right here in this state. What didn't eventuate was that action actually going into good economic policy. And so for me, it meant these bunch of great humans in the room who had all the right solutions. Unfortunately, things got sanitised down for very many different reasons, to the point where we didn't get the things done that we really could have 5 years ago. And so that made me feel really pissed off, that when we had the solutions and we had the IP here and we had the resources and the capital and the intent and we had the opportunity to change our policy, that we didn't. And so that made me think about things a little bit differently. So that's why I'm here.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. I mean, it does sound like you've been driving things for quite a bit of time. So, and different sort of arenas in terms of industries and things like that. So, I mean, thank you for all those different sort of actions in different places, and no doubt they're all kind of like stepping stones. Pia, how about yourself? What's that journey been like?
Yeah, I guess so. My journey started back at university. I started with a background in architecture, actually. I worked out pretty early on in my degree that I didn't want to be an architect, but I didn't know what else I wanted to do. So that was a bit of a hurdle for me. So I was like, I'll just continue on this path because I don't know what else to do. And the concept of energy efficiency or sustainable design at the time was very much not part of the core curriculum. If you wanted to know about it, there were some electives spread out, maybe 2 subjects, I think, over a 5-year course. And I opted to do those subjects, which sparked my interest initially, which is also then how I ended up down the course or the pathway that I ended up. So one of the external tutors that was brought in was my previous boss at Suho. He showed me all about the Nathers softwares and all the other software that existed at the time, which was about energy modelling and SunPass and passive design and all those different things. So that is where I started. Similar situation to Ali's here in that after working in the industry for way too many years, pretty much every day was based around banging my head against a brick wall, talking to builders who were like, I need minimum compliance and won't go further. We'd have homeowners calling saying, but it says I'm getting a house that complies. And we're like, well, technically it doesn't actually say that in your contract. And your builder's only giving you minimum compliance and they're not giving you more than that. There might be a loophole or legislation is changed by lobbyists who were probably more interested in money than the future of the world, essentially. So down that course was trying to find ways to make a difference in every way possible, which is sort of where I ended up where I am now. So I, as part of that journey, did develop internal systems for processing rule compliance and those types of things, which is where we've ended up learning the intricacies of the software that's available and the predictions that you can get out of those, and to help people make better decisions for the future and to make homeowners more comfortable. I mean, that's the key thing, isn't it? It's about them being more comfortable in their homes and being able to have a say in what they're getting and not being forced into something that's they're not aware of. So, yeah.
No, that's fantastic, and it's always in different opportunities leading to the various stepping stones, and I'm sure there's a lot of arenas that I think the ongoing conversation, even through including Alex's presentation alongside yours, is the thing around decision making, and I kind of wanted to direct a question generally from both of y'all around that sort of arena, around decision making through, well, data-driven decision making, and how do you have those? What sort of conversations do you have your clients around data-driven decision making that you think is leading to better outcomes?
Great question. I think for the first time in history, I'm excited by the fact that large corporations now have a director of climate on their board and in their executive. That's never happened before in Australia. People like, this is a big deal that people have the pay packet and the KPIs and the remit to make decisions with a budget in climate or sustainability or impact. Those frameworks haven't been there. So those decision makers have changed. So 2 years ago, when I was talking to large institutions and you'd get to the buyer, the decision maker, the person with the KPI attached to their team, climate, sustainability, the data on this really didn't affect whether they would get their bonus or not. So it didn't necessarily affect the outcome. now there's a massive opportunity that didn't exist before, where we have people like yourselves who now have those positions of influence and power in decision making, who also understand circularity and understand climate impact and everything we talk about like isn't something that ever got decided before. When it comes to data-driven insights though, I think it's important to note in the conversations that I have is that data is different to AI data, and you have to be really, really aware of that. There is a large amount of risk associated with AI-centric data versus data that are attributes that are real and live and you can explain them. And so the explainability versus a black box is really important. So we have a venture partnership with KPMG. A lot of their clients look to us for data insights and reporting and projects that we do collaboratively. What's very, very important is that we can explain how the information has been derived and pinpoint how that's been done. And that if a human was given the same question and answers or had the same ability to conduct the same and run the same tests that we did, they would get to the same answer as the AI would. So I know we're being channeled in the media that AI is suddenly something that's going to solve all the world's problems. It's actually something that everyone wants on their balance sheet to be something that they're doing because it's fun and it keeps them looking relevant. But we have to be real about the knowledge and the data that they actually want has to be explainable beyond the AI.
No, that's fantastic. And I mean, that probably coincides with the things that Hubble's doing, right? Because it's rapid prototyping in a digital sort of atmosphere, but it still needs to be articulated or, did you say like
Explainable.
Explainable, yeah. And could you give us some insight on that from the being able to make decisions through data-driven?
Yeah, I guess the data side of things, or I guess if we take it back a few steps in some of the things I was referring to in my presentation in terms of the decision-making process, a lot of it was based on one input, one outcome, and then hours of people having to do manual labour to come to an outcome. So the idea that you could have millions of options in front of you in a couple of minutes at the moment is probably overwhelming for a number of people companies we're talking to. So we do have to bring that down to a level of trying to communicate to them what the outcomes are and the impacts that are there for them, and also showing the positives, because one input and one output is not very productive if you're if you're looking at the possibilities of the future. That's not really going to get us very far. In terms of the AI and what we're looking at is we're very conscious of the accuracy in terms of what we're doing. So while we have huge amounts of data, as Alice was alluding to, the quality of AI is also based on the data that's fed into it. So the outcome is only valid for what's fed in. So if you're not putting in good stuff, it's not going to get a great outcome. So we're very conscious that what needs to go in is also really accurate and positive coming out the other side, so that there's reliability on that and an understanding, and there's that insight and the word escapes me, but transparency around what it is that someone's getting as well.
And I'm sure you have some really fun conversations with people that might be utilizing the platforms, or with clients wanting to have your insights on things, quite literally on like how it gets explained. Are there any good stories about explaining some of the data and then it's kind of going, whoa?
I have a tradie. His name is Ben. He's based in Northern Victoria.
Here? That Ben? No,
he's about 72. The idea of him being told he needed to log into a platform and use a new tool to be able to do something at work scared the absolute shit out of him. And he is our biggest supporter now, which is really great. So it's not about scaring people with data. It's more about getting people on a journey where they feel comfortable. And he's one of our biggest champions. He's the one, he's the one when he goes to his local bowls club, he's the thought leader in the room with his mates over the beer, because he can explain things to them. And, that's what it's about. Literacy. It's about everyone feeling comfortable. This is normal stuff that they should be proud of and they're happy doing. And it's not In the olden days, being a sustainability engineer meant you did really complex things where you told everybody complex stuff so that you were important. And I think the future is...
Aw, you've taken away my whole game.
The future...
Alice, no, don't tell everyone that.
The future is, this is everybody's game, right? Everyone has to be able to own a piece of it. You've got to understand it in a way that makes sense to you and your buddies over a beer at bowls. So Ben is my example.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's really being able to drive home sort of like tangible sort of aspects. Any good stories around explaining some of the outputs so people can like understand and also how to utilize and leverage the data?
Yeah, I'm not just trying to think of anything specifically. I guess the first thing that springs to mind is we were working with a very large Australian builder who, in preparation for the changes from 6 to 7 stars, was trying to work out what implication that meant for their designs in terms of achieving 7 stars and their costs. When we engaged with them, it was probably halfway down their process, well, not halfway, but too far essentially down their process. And they had spent hours and hours simulating 3 of their house design portfolio to work out what the implication was to 7 stars for them. And in essentially 2 days, we had done the same work. So they had spent months and months on this, and in 2 days, we had given them exactly the same outcomes, but with greater insights. So we were able to show them that what they were trying to seek, which is essentially a standard specification build across Australia, in like obviously for their bottom line made sense, but in terms of actually building really was impractical when you're thinking about building the same house design in Melbourne and in Brisbane. They don't have the same climates, they don't have the same scenarios, you can't really build the same thing, but that's what they wanted to do. And last time we did speak to them, they were still at the same point. They hadn't progressed beyond that point, and they still, and I'm only talking within the last few months, they still hadn't progressed beyond that point of trying to get that same specification across Australia, which I don't actually know what they're going to do, because the reality of that in terms of achieving 7 stars or even going beyond, so that's only achieving minimum compliance at this point without the consideration for future, what that means for the future homeowner either. Like 7 stars minimum compliance now is not safeguarding that homeowner in the future. So be interested to see where they go at some point.
Yeah, sure.
If they built it underground, you'd be able to do that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, in theory,
Yeah.
No.
That brings up a interesting bit, because that kind of links right into Ali's your presentation around one, what are the carrots that end up becoming to help facilitate that bit, and I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of talk about those implications, because Val.Ai has been able to create an interface between financial levers and also considering this data on a portfolio standpoint. Could you give us some insights on almost like that kind of situation, or like maybe almost like teasing that out on, okay, but if you looked at the carrots at the moment, this would be possible if you implemented it, but then when will it become like compliance, kind of like the financial disclosure standpoint? Mm-hmm. It might be a little bit of a complicated question, sorry for pulling in many different directions, but I just wanted to get your feedback on that, because you're sort of not necessarily from like the object design bit, but then this is strategic sort of coverage from a financial system. So that'd be really, really interesting.
So those houses, right? Those houses for the next 3 years that they're building, in 3 years' time when you turn the key, they will not be compliant anymore, because in 3 years' time we will have moved on. And so those developers are wonderful human beings that we work with too to try and leverage new opportunities. But anything that an Australian person turns their key on is going to need uplift. What's probably more important from that financial perspective is those homes will be uninsurable in parts of Australia. So California state is a really great example of it at the moment. Global reinsurers have just pulled out of there in the last 4 months. There are whole parts of California that your standard house, your California bungalow, cannot be insured. And if you think about the way our housing system and finances work in Australia, if you go for a mortgage or go for a loan, which is the most of us, you can't get that unless the house is insurable.
Yep.
So that completely disrupts our housing and economic system in the country, even for new builds that are less than 3 years old if they don't comply with 7 stars. There's like a really big conundrum that all these different groups and all these different levers are pulling on. I don't have the answer to solve that problem. I'm just here to maybe create a bit of friction amongst them all to say, you're all talking about this, you're all thinking about this. Are there ways we should be working together quicker to solve this problem, or at least coming up with some really great use cases of how things maybe have been solved in certain environments in certain ways that could be replicated?
Yeah, and it is kind of interesting, just from my observation around the sustainability sphere. It definitely has origin. Well, I mean, the obvious origin of anything in regards to sustainability is let's do better for the environment. But sustainability has become intrinsic to things, mainly because sometimes financial uplift, but then even more so, the big stick is the risk kind of like factor. And is that, that's obviously a lot of conversations that you have as well, but I was wondering from both of you, from like that how does, well, I don't know if I'm answering my own question, but does the data that you're able to provide help with that risk, like de-escalation of risk? Is that also a big component of how your platforms will continue to gain trust?
I'll go. Yeah. Yes. The short answer is yes. So in terms of what we're proposing is, or what we're working towards is showing beyond that minimum level and showing, like Alice is talking to, that future that is essentially being climate ready and resilient to the future. I mean, current, when I'm referring back to scenario I was looking at before, when they're talking about 7 stars under the NADAS scheme, we're still talking about weather data files that are outdated and don't even include future climates. So nothing that's being built, as Alice mentioned, is even ready for the future scenario. So if we're able to then show the future options and the possibilities and what it could be, is also trying to minimise that risk level. And thankfully, there is a lot more talk around being climate ready and people being prepared to do more than just minimum. Although it is small chatter, it is heartening to see that particularly from a homeowner's perspective, the people are actually demanding more. So they themselves are trying to reduce their own risk to push further than what is expected of them or what is minimum.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Risk, yes. So Task Force for Financial Disclosures and Climate Risk, any large institution in this country was meant to on July 30 this year, and the federal government's just given them an extension because a couple of big ones weren't ready,
like
and they got to pay.
Do it.
So July 30 next year, every big institution will have to, on their balance sheet at the end of the year, disclose their risk, and their risk will have to include a line that says climate risk. And climate risk will include residential assets. It's never had to before. And how are they going to do that? They're going to need the data to be able to show and expose their risk. And then once they have that data disclosed, they're going to have to do something about it. So they've measured it, they're going to have to manage it, and they're going to be held accountable by ASIC. This is a big moment, and that's why the federal government's given them another year to get their shit together. Problem, opportunity, greenwashing, yes, there will be lots of it. What's important is there's people there giving the right data in the right way, but what's more important is a bunch of capital will be put towards this in the next 18 months, 24 months, right? It could go to things that won't change it. It could all be wasted money in terms of choices that are made about how that money is spent. There's a lot of solutions that are going to work and are scalable now in terms of retrofitting existing properties and new builds, new tech, new types of hardwares and installations that should just be a minimum standard on a property. So it's just about making sure that everyone in their own backyards, when you're talking about this stuff and you're in those rooms to make decisions, are making sure if they're deploying capital and there's a big announcement about $1 million or $15 million is going towards this, how is it being spent? Is it going on the ground? And how are we going to see that in 2 or 3 years' time actually bringing that carbon footprint down?
Yeah, so it's basically, it's not even a call to action. It's a call to save your ass. If you're in those rooms, be like, oh, what are we doing? What are we doing? That is the ongoing question, isn't it? And what are we doing now is seeing if we have any questions from the floor after a little bit of a pin up on that. Do we have a question? Oh, we had a question down here. Could we, yeah, just give me the mic. We're comfortable enough for me getting up and down the room, right? The reason why we have a mic is because we do capture this on video, so this is not voice amplification.
Hello. Oh, so this is...
No worries.
So this is for actually the recording?
Yeah, this is for the recording. Yeah. Ask away.
Sort of just coming back onto that last sort of discussion point, my question's for Alice. It looks like you're doing a lot of work with sort of the in-home energy assessments, and I wonder, we are likely going to see mandatory disclosures become a big part of the national country. And obviously selling a house, it's important to know what that house actually entails. What am I buying for my money for an existing home? How much are you sort of playing in that space and sort of starting to maybe even talk to the real estate agents? Because that's where the biggest roadblock is. They don't want a house that's even harder to sell than one that's currently hard to sell. So do you have any sort of comments around that?
At the Real Estate Institute of Australia's awards that were held in Tasmania 2 weeks ago, a new award category, the sustainability category for real estate agents, was won by Tarntanya Real Estate here from South Australia for utilising our in-home assessment tool, which was found as being the simplest and easiest way to disclose at time of rent or sale the energy use and the efficiency, and also because of those home attributes, how much more the property was worth because it was sustainable. So there aren't actually, I'm just being challenging because I can to the audience, there is a rhetoric that we can't have mandatory disclosures because there's all these barriers, because there's all these sectors who can't get on board. We have done user testing with 5 valuation firms across banks and the country who go into homes, a tradie network throughout the country. These are dudes of every age who can use the platform, and also real estate agents who can use it themselves. So I don't think that there is a barrier. I think that there is also groups like Domain and realestate.com that we are working with who are already poised, ready to start inputting this data and talking about it, because they know that when you look for a property, if you know not the sustainability rating, not the NatHERS rating, no one really understands it or cares, but if you know how much more your house is going to sell for because you've got this stuff on your house, it's important and it's more saleable, so the agent's going to make more money if your house is more sustainable. And what's probably most important is CDR status in Australia. So consumer data rights privileges have changed a little bit recently. So we provide open energy data to our customers. So what that means is we can show you the dwelling. If you're looking around it at time of rent or sale, we can tell you what the occupant currently pays on their energy bill now. So it's not linked to you as a person, but it gives you a much better idea of your cost of living going into that home, whether you're buying it or renting it. And so that, I think, is the pivotal thing. So that I don't believe there's a barrier. I just think we all just need to get into a room. And again, there isn't one solution. There's multiple solutions that are doing this already. It's just about getting the right informed policy to say it's time for us to hit go on it.
And if I can jump in again, can I?
Go ahead.
Is that okay, everyone? NatHERS have obviously they're building their own in-home energy assessment as well for existing houses, which we're not sure when that's going to be released. And then there's the Victorian scorecard version as well, which is only people who are trained and accredited can do that. Can you speak to the differences between sort of what you have, where sounds like tradies or real estate agents are ones who can actually go out and do this assessment? How much probably more beneficial that is for actually moving change forward?
Sure. So CSI, Royal and CoreLogic have worked together on the whole of home rapid rate assessment tool. What that is you'll be able to API some data that tells you the NatHERS rating or an approximate rating for that home. It's underway. I'm in Data 61 in Sydney next Tuesday doing a chat with the CSIRO team about how well that's going. They've just finished some project work with National Australia Bank to be able to embed that into their system. They're unfortunately, as has already been spoken to, the data that they have isn't accurate enough to give certainty for financial lending use. So while the data will be there and we'll be able to rapidly deploy it across all the channels that they work in already, there are barriers to the way in which it will be able to use for its accuracy. There are the other kind of scorecards and assessment tools. NatHERS isn't a bad system. It was built by sustainability engineers. It's been around for like 15, 20 years. What the problem has been is the rapid deployment of it and understanding of it and usability of it. So today in Australia, if you want to have an assessment done, you have to, one, know where to look to find the person to do it. You have to call the person to come to your home to do the assessment. It can cost you out of pocket $200 to $700. And that's if you're in a centre. If you're in a regional centre, you cannot get a person out to your site. So there's a massive barrier to adoption for this happening. And it takes weeks, like it's an old process. So all of our assessment tools exist to be able to fast track that to market. So we went out and built a whole of home with a tool with a sustainability engineer. So ours takes into effect all of the attributes that CSIRO's does and others to be able to look at what a sustainability rating for a home is. We believe it's very accurate. It's accurate enough for our current customers to be able to utilise it, but we're not naive. My aim is I will always be the dumbest person in the room. I want to surround myself with smarter people than me. We've built our technology in a modular way on the cloud with Amazon. That means that when CSIRO's rapid rate is deployed as the data point of choice, we can API that into our product. When the government decides what it is that they want to be made available to consumers, we are there to ingest it and use it in the way that it needs to for us to be able to work across the market. We welcome the opportunity to be able to do that. That type of competition makes stuff happen quicker for a country, so I'm actually really welcoming it happening.
And Pia, I want to bring you in on something like that because we were talking about transparency, data transparency, and also good quality kind of data. In translating that a bit, is like if we're able to use a platform that we can input that, and then the user interface is much healthier, positive, easier to use. Then how can we? Because from Hubble's standpoint, you're putting in actual building data, like the specific specs and things of that nature. What do you think would it take to kind of be able to get that level of disclosure? So it's almost like it's great to have a starting point of mining data, but then what if we had more data inputs that could be tracked through design, or like having to disclose that data to be able to go through Hubble, get all the design efficiencies, and then all of a sudden you disclose that to fall into what a score is. Can we make that happen?
Yes.
Oh,
That's what we've built. Yeah, I guess that's what you're alluding to. But going back to what Alice was obviously talking about in terms of NATHERS, everyone is aware it's a very covert, clouded concept. No one really knows. You need an expert and all those other things, which is part of where Hubble's come from, the idea that it shouldn't be that foreign and that anybody should be able to get at least an idea and an understanding of what the potential rating could be without having to engage an expert and without having to wear that time-consuming exercise to get there, which is what we've been working towards. And guess in terms of that quality of data, which we were also talking about earlier, that you were talking about with rapid rate, that is one of the standing issues, that it is based on, the data is based on assessments that have been submitted through accredited assessing organisations, which means the data is primarily based on locations that are aligned to accredited assessors. So Victoria is very heavily weighted towards accrediting areas. South Australia, we don't have any requirement for accredited assessors. So if you have an assessment from South Australia that is actually accredited, they're not always they're not common, or they are common, but the number versus the Victorian data is obviously skewed. So you're getting very skewed data through rapid rate, plus it's only from compliance level, like 6 stars onwards. So they have to do calculations to get the other side of it. So those types of things in terms of the transparency of the data and the understanding of what the data is what we're trying to sort of overcome and give that accuracy that's Australia-wide, not skewed to certain locations. Forgot the first part of your question. Now I got sidetracked. Sorry.
That's okay. That's just how these
It's
yarns
very
go.
easy to do that.
This is how these yarns go because, then we go in one direction, but I guarantee we're going to
Yeah.
loop back to what I even forgot what I asked. So we're going to loop back to that somewhere down the lane.
I'm just going to talk about sandboxes of data in places other than
Can
Australia.
you explain what a sandbox of data?
So there's
data
a bunch
actually is?
a bunch of other countries for a really long time have shared this kind of data. We're not very good at that, I don't believe, here in Australia. Sometimes we are good at it, but when it comes to housing data, no, we're not. In a future state, imagine if the explainability of NatHERS was public and it was open source, and then anyone could go in to a place and unlock a whole heap of data sets. And so there could be 10 more of us operating in this zone, all delivering towards this. So at the scale and pace and rapid assessment, platforms that we need in order for us to be able to retrofit homes quickly. Other governments allow us to share data and play with data and come up with novel solutions or partner together and exchange data in order to be able to build good use cases quickly. We could be doing more of that here. Yeah. Throughout Europe, particularly Germany, they've done it for a really long time. Some of it was even open banking transactional data, which they've now pulled back on because of privacy reasons. But you used to be able to get a whole heap of really interesting data so you could test it and train it and play with it and look at ways in which we could solve problems quicker. There's a bunch of data sets that we could all be sharing amongst governments, amongst government departments, that could set up some really cool hackathons for some unis to be able to come up with ways in which they could solve intricate problems a lot quicker.
Oh, yeah. And that needs also rapid collaboration, isn't it? So who in here is a data nerd or data nerd, however you say it? We got a few of them. Yeah, rapid collaboration. That is absolutely necessary. I know some of y'all that are super interested in data, whatever you say in this country. I know some of y'all are out there, you're just a little bit shy to raise your hand on that.
Yeah, I have so many more questions, but I should pass it on.
Yeah, you're hogging the mic. Do we have another question? We have a question down here.
You've touched on a bit of some sort of policy lever type things, but a question for both of you: if you had an audience with the Premier, what would your wish list be? What would be at the top of your wish list as far as levers or removing barriers would be?
There's a
Great
LinkedIn
question.
post that I put out today and I tagged him in, so we'll see.
Oh,
where that goes.
hashtag LinkedIn influencer.
I'm sure it didn't go to him, it went to his PA who manages his LinkedIn account. I would like to see mandatory disclosure of energy performance at time of rent or sale. I would like a real estate agency or a collaboration through the Real Estate Institute of South Australia to just uplift a bunch of agents and have suburb by suburb them actually just disclosing this as a bit of a trial and getting some real use case examples of it. And the same with any housing development company in the state. Maybe they need to be giving you an option at time of purchase where you've actually crunched the numbers, and rather than it being an opt-in for the mixer tap and the silver this appliance and the thing that costs more, it is the norm that you get the sustainable option and you have to opt out. And we need to do that across a couple of suburbs. And I think we could get that done. So if there's a barrier of we don't have the solution or we don't have the capital to bring in the companies who can deliver that, we can get it done.
I probably echo your comments around mandatory disclosure. I remember going to one of the first conversations or presentations about mandatory disclosure, and the number of up in arms people that left the space was quite unbelievable for the idea of what people were proposing. So it was quite, even though the ACT had still managed to do it right from the get-go, it was still a problem for every other state, which was quite fascinating actually if you think about it. But so yeah, mandatory disclosure would be fabulous to see, and also just obviously in terms of the use of something like our tool to enable people to actually see the outcomes straight up rather than whether it's our tool or another tool, doesn't really matter, but that conversation at the point of sale, that when someone chooses a house for a block of land, they're choosing something with the right orientation, not something with the wrong orientation, because that's fundamentally, well, actually if you go back a step further, you could actually, the developers, developing housing sites with blocks facing the right way actually would be the best start. So they're not just doing it about money. It's actually about
And
sustainability. But
we've
anyway,
got a lot of land releases just announced.
Yes.
Pew, pew, pew.
Hi. Can you make sure they're facing the right way? Sometimes that's the biggest hurdle. Yes, so that would be great to see. But also just the concept of continuously delaying the adoption of things like the building code transitions to 7 stars. I think that every time there's a delay, and it doesn't matter whether it's here or in another state, every time there's a delay, the talk then does transition to the concept that it's not that important. So if governments can delay it, then the consumer who is not invested or is not educated or doesn't really know doesn't see the value in it every time that occurs. So it would be great to see those things actually adopted straight off the bat, or pushing for further and trying to push it further and achieving better from the get-go.
We have a question in the back, but if you don't mind, I'm gonna just do a quick request for a workshop, because you just said something that's not really blown my mind, but I was like, never really thought about that before, was the sustainability opt-out option.
This is a behaviour change
Well,
tool
this is the
and
thing, is
tactic
that-
that's used in other countries. Is like we do opt-in in this country. You want to offset your flight, you have to opt-in. If you
Correct.
opt out, you are less likely to opt out if there's a shared value where people can see that you're opting out.
Well, could we,
That public disclosure, you won't opt out.
could we do a quick workshop of what that might actually look like? Because that is a fascinating. I'm sorry if I seem so bewildered by this kind of like thought process, but it's like, what would a sustainability opt-out actually look like? And feel free if someone else has a comment about this, but what would a sustainability opt-out include? Because it's like, oh, we've designed everything and the price is to 7 stars, or let's just say even a commercial asset, it's to hitting this kind of performance in neighbors, and you're not going to opt out, so it's all above, like in commercial terms, you say like above the line financially, and then when you take this out, it's going to drop this, this, and this, and this, and by the way, that's no longer minimum compliance. So then that means you got to take that risk on the chin from a asset standpoint or something like that. Can we talk this a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess there's definitely more value in commercial buildings than there is in residential buildings. So it does make a big difference in terms of the position people expect to sit in terms of sustainability and the minimum compliance and the opt-in or opt-out.
But I want to challenge that to say we just don't have the data, right? Like if we had a lot of properties that were in a suburb that were compliant and we sold them over a period of time, there might be more uplift in the market value of that property. So you won't be losing out. Just as it is. So if you're a commercial property, my way of pitching back with you is it's going to cost you 15 mil now. But if you sanitise it down, within the next 5 years, you're going to spend 25 million, slowly, incrementally doing that to meet your minimum standards. So over that 5-year term, it's actually costing you 20% more doing it over time. You're better off doing it now.
Yeah. Indeed.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is people, and if you're looking at the residential sector and you're talking about the opt-in section, I think half the problem is that salespeople themselves are not educated enough to be able to have those discussions. So, simple things like having double glazing at the beginning is actually like it's going to cost you more to retrofit double glazing later on than to change a stone bench top in later on. So you can start with a laminate, but to begin with, but put stone in afterwards. That's cheaper than putting in double glazing, but people are still being sold on the aesthetic value of a property and not what the longevity of living in it and the implications that they could save for a stone bench top in a couple of months if they put in double glazing versus the other way around. So I think a lot of it, while the opt-in is definitely valuable, the education and the turning point needs to exist as well at some point in there.
Yep. Well, I look forward to continuing dreaming about what the sustainability opt-out thing will look like. So really appreciate that spark. We had a question in the back.
Yeah, hi guys. I'm just wondering.
Speak louder, please.
I'm just wondering from a individual point of view, like I think the Australian market is very much driven by what the consumer wants. So is there, and it sounds like you guys have the skill and the know-how and the data, is there a possibility, or how far is this down the road for me as a consumer to maybe plug in my house stats and then I get a whole bunch of information about how I can make it better? Or if I'm looking to buy a house, I've got 3 options and I can plug in those house stats and I can understand which one is the best option at that time.
I don't know if you want to talk to that, Tor. Yeah. Well, technically you could effectively do that now, in theory. The very first prototype that we have worked on, which was an experiment in itself, which was developed for the Adapt West councils. Essentially, does that in very, very initial concept. If you go in there and put in your location and your orientation, it makes an assumption based on data about era and location as to essentially what constructions are in that property, and it can provide you with an insight about how it's likely to perform, and that can be expanded quite substantially, quite easily as well. So it's that concept is something that we're actually working towards, to be able to, as a homeowner, have that information at your hand, and not having to rely necessarily always on someone or having to have a consultant come in and give you that information yourself, because it can be a hurdle for some people.
So I operate in Australia under the trading name Home Efficiency Australia as a trusted source of truth for some of our customers. So you won't see Val.Ai as a brand in many places. Up until 2 months ago, we had a free tool available to the public where you could do just that with a bunch of different groups working with us. That's no longer available, but I can make it available for you if you want to have a play with it at all. Through some banking apps here in Australia, you will be able to punch that data in the next 3 months, and you will be able to get a range of products, services, ROI, payback periods in order for you to be able to do that through that financial institution. And there's a bunch of other people doing similar on other native digital apps that we supply data to. So it's coming. I think what's really cool about what you said to point out is that consumers want it. So we know from the last election that 86% of consumers want to take action on climate. But then when you survey people on will they prioritise that from a financial perspective with all of the things that are going on in our lives right now, what tends to happen to those decisions is it slowly gets put down behind, childcare fees and paying the bills and everything, and it gets deprioritised. So what's important is large institutions that we speak to in governments and others know that consumers care about it, but they don't care enough about it to prioritise it. So I think that's the thing that's important, is that consumers need to start showing that they're prioritising it in their decision making more. And those large institutions who do remain quite in control of things have already got the solutions there. They're waiting until the market pushes there for them to have to release them to market, because sometimes they want to wait until there's enough consumer demand for those things to happen. So I think the more that we make decisions based on those things, the quicker actions will be able to happen. And yes, ROIs, payback periods, products and services, bundling options for you to be able to do that or use your own capital are all coming to market in Australia.
It's somewhat of a devil's advocate kind of thing, though, is that having that information is one, and then potentially the market, if you talk about market forces being one, consumer demand, but in housing or let's just say real estate, do you think the bigger lever is going to be in the insurance premium or the want to do something?
Our user testing has shown it's never the want to do something. I know that we intrinsically believe so badly in our value set, but ultimately,
but that's all I can go on.
The market really does. But what's important is whether you are a property owner or a renter or someone who owns multiple properties, What matters is at the end of the day that it gives you a financial return, and that when you sell it, you're making more than what you invested. So I think as long as we always have that lens on any decision making you're doing, as long as we can show that it will increase your market value, it will increase your return, you're more likely to get buy-in. Yeah.
Your market value, because in some cases it's also kind of that, right? It's like this whole thing around climate risk also being stranded assets.
Yes. I haven't even talked about stranded assets. So,
does anyone want to ask a question?
No, let's just not go there.
Okay. Pia, sorry, I think I cut you off.
No,
because you were about to say something.
No, I was just going to say our user testing is very similar. It's generally the biggest, while people want to make the difference, the biggest hurdle we've found is it's the monetary side of things. Like you were saying, it's prioritised lower. But while people want to make the change, sometimes I think it's if they can see the return on investment from making changes that don't cost a thing. So sometimes even just behavioural changes can actually spark them towards making a change that is even might cost them a small amount. Sometimes it's just the thought hurdle that is sometimes all it takes to get them across the line to the next step. So bridging that gap can sometimes be the biggest hurdle in itself.
Yeah, awesome. Do we happen to have another question? Can we? I really appreciate y'all being a self-organizing organism and taking the responsibility out of our hands to move the mic around. So appreciate y'all.
So my name's Christian. I'm from Hubble, so I'm kind of throwing Pia under the bus with this question.
How dare you?
So one of the obviously we're at Hubble involved in software development. Otherwise, because I'm the lead software developer, if we weren't involved, I'd be kind of in trouble. And then for Val.Ai, you have a lot of software as a service products. This is more like a general storytelling question, but have you had? Are there any key experiences you've had, perhaps with? Okay, so let me frame the question a bit better. With software development, there's always kind of a disconnect between the software developer who knows how to code and the domain expert who knows, about the actual scientific subject. For example, yourself, you did your study at Flinders under STEM. You would know probably a different subset of knowledge to the software developers in many cases. Are there any experiences you've had where any challenges or success stories or anything where you're sharing that knowledge, particularly around sustainability, with the software developers who are often driving a core chunk of your R&D efforts? Is that too generic a question?
And by the way, that's how engineers think of architects as well. Sorry, back to the question. Just had to take the opportunity.
So Engineers Australia have a thing called a just transition, right? So it's about, you don't want engineers now creating all the problems of the future, right, with their design principles. Same goes with your CX and your UX versus your people in the back end building and productionising the software. We're all human beings. So I guess all I can say is being able to bring a team together in a room and be able to communicate effectively and be able to communicate at the level that makes sense for everyone in the room is really important. And my biggest learning has been getting to know my team and what motivates them and what skills we have, but also what we're missing to bring in the right people. So we do have a head of design and product and a CX and a UX designer. They work and operate very differently to my machine learning engineer and my data scientist. So much so that one tiny little nugget was one of them, because we're all on the spectrum, right? All people are on the spectrum, but this one individual did not like being looked at in the eye. And one of our other team members really loved just really eyeballing people in the eye. And we were just not getting anything done. And we didn't, until we had this moment of human kindness where we actually thought about how do we best work together? Let's share in a room how we best work. When we teased that out about ourselves as a team, we actually became super more effective about making sure that things got tickets got raised in Jura, things got raised to production, things got QA'd and tested by the process became a lot smoother when we knew how to work together. Yeah.
Brilliant. Pia, do you want to answer this with a colleague, or are you going to
I'm
be?
not sure I should be answering that one.
It's all right. You can throw me back under the bus as well if you want.
No, that's fantastic. No, I really do appreciate that. Do we have one last question from the group? self-organizing organism. This is beautiful. This is magic.
Cheers. Just wondering if these tools can also be used as checking tools at all, just to, I guess you signed up with a builder for a 7-star building, but your energy bills maybe not reflecting what you think they might be. Is there a way of coming back and going, hey, is this looking right? Or did I get what I paid for? That kind of stuff.
Do you mean post-build and post-occupancy?
Yes.
Or you might have a new startup that you've invented right there. They can take our stuff and use it against the building code.
Loaded area, basically. There's so many issues with just general levels of compliance, levels of build, compliance build, building to code, substitutions of products, whether or not you have skilled labourers. Being able to quantify, I mean, NADAS in itself is only a predictive tool. It's based off of planned, it's not operational expectations either, or lived-in experience. As I said, the data files are old data files. It assumes a little 4-person family in the background who lives in a certain way, which is not the reality of how people live. So it'd be really hard to, while there's an expectation, it'd be really hard to quantify that without an actual assessment of post-build to quantify the expectation at that point, and then you could possibly start from there. But you could essentially get another NADAS assessment done, or engage in a different tool to assess it based on your consumption levels at that point in time would be probably the first step. But ideally, if it was done right the first time beforehand, that would be the ideal scenario, which is still not quite there. But then you are looking at tools that are renovation set tools. But it's not unsurprising that a house wouldn't be performing to expectation, unfortunately, to say.
Yeah, that's definitely, I guess as an architect, one of my biggest frustrations is you put all this effort into specifying everything, working with your consultants to come up with this, and then watch things just get pulled out. Or even the testing regimes at the start of the project, the client commits to doing this, and then as a VM option, it's the easiest thing is to save 20 grand, 50 grand on some testing. And
but in the future, we're going to be opting out of those.
That's
opting in.
That's right. So at KeyTurn, you can use our assessment tool now to conduct a rapid assessment, and then your agent could provide you with that. And then you could live in the property for a quarter and you could run it again and have your energy data there to compare apples for apples. No home at turnkey will be the same as when you lived in it for 12 weeks, because we bring all our home and habits into it, right? Like we bring all our kit and our stuff. So what the house was on paper will never be what it is when it's lived in. What's important is probably the data when you've lived in it for the first 12 weeks, and then any uplift that you do to the property, it should then show it then. So I think there's value in ensuring that new builds meet a minimum compliance standard, and we still live in tents and there's so much work that can be done. But post that, it's more about the way in which we have our habits within the home and holding energy retailers and other things accountable, and ourselves accountable for how we're using our houses.
If you're looking at it from an architect's point of view though, I guess for an architect you also hand over to a builder at some point in that process, and you lose a lot of the control essentially around that build. And I haven't got an answer for how you manage that. Obviously, dealing with project home builders on different side, they manage it from start to end, so they have more responsibility of that process. And also architectural buildings don't fit well with the NADAS software, so you're going to be up against that barrier too.
A really long time ago, Lendlease and I did a project with another organisation I worked with up in Darwin for all of their defence housing. So there was this massive estate that was built.
I wasn't part of that.
And they were beautiful houses. They looked identical. They all had grey roofs. They were all facing the same direction, but they all looked really beautiful. And all of the defence housing families got to move into this new area, and it was great. And I was working with a nature conservation organisation at the time, so we were there to do ways for them to be able to rewild their local bushland, so that they were getting their kids involved in something in the environment. The thing was though, when they turned the key, the homes all met minimum standards for Darwin conditions. But 3 months later, when I returned back there again to do some more work with them out in the bush, almost every home transformed, because when they'd lived there for a few weeks, they'd all start, because it was Darwin weather and it was a build-up, like air conditioning units around every single square inch of that property. So even if they do get a rating at time of key, it's more important that we get the way that they use it working. And Lendlease knew that was happening and were doing everything they could actually at the time to try and intervene and come up with other ways they could be doing other things. And nothing changed the dial for the consumer in their own home. So even there were senior executives in climate in Lendlease who were living in that estate who knew that, and they were speaking to it in the room, like publicly. But then when they'd go home at the end of the day with their wife and kids, they were still cranking the aircon because they really needed it. So like that's what we do as humans, right? It's like, how do we create a human-centric response where we'll live and die by our commitment, I guess.
Yep. So that's why we just got to make sure things are just, done in the background, and, people don't even have to worry about it. And that's why we're just going to be overrun by machines, right? Oh, just kidding. Just jokes. Thank you so much for a lot of that insight. But I didn't just wanting to wrap up now after that fantastic yarn that we just had with everyone in the room. And usually the go-to here is to ask people, all the takeaways to get away. But because we have digital solutions, I want to know what is on the future sort of like development. So now you get to be like those Apple or Microsoft CEOs and be like, this is what we're about to launch in the future. Do you want to do that? No? That's not attractive at all. Well, anyways, what are some things that you guys are looking to develop? Because software's a RIMS is always kind of evolving. So it'd be great to see what's coming up next. Please.
Yeah, chatbots are already a thing, right? Like we're all using them all the time. It's not something like LMMs are something that's coming, but not really. Like we're all using them, so that's not really exciting. Something we're working on because it's fun, and one of our machine learning engineers is really keen to just add one of those in there somewhere. I'm kind of more interested in it from a just transition perspective of what if you're low English speaking or you're non-English speaking background, or it's easier for you to use a technology like that if you're blind or hearing impaired. Like how can we make these things more available, or you're on country and there's a different language you want to in, how can we use this data and AI tech for good? So like that's more exciting to me than just having another chatbot, because they're predicting with AI in the next 3 years there's going to be this massive crash of chatbots where we all completely, it's a bit like blockchain, we're all really excited about it and then we weren't. So, that wave is going to happen. I'm kind of looking beyond that wave to what we might be able to achieve. Open aerial imagery analysis is really cool. We already have that stuff, but maybe in time, our tools, you actually won't have to do anything, including hold your phone anymore. Maybe you'll just be able to walk around and it will collate that data, and then that will be inputted into the data set. Nice. That would be cool.
Pia, time to throw your colleague under the bus because he's going to be developing it.
Yeah, pressure's on. For the future, I mean, it would be great to see, one of the things we are looking at is the concept of the NADRs, aligning the NADRs assessments with the ability to alter the little robot family in the background. So if you are a homeowner and you live differently and you work differently and you have different occupancy, you occupy the house differently, how can you work out what you were talking to before about how you're going to use that house and what that actually would look like as an outcome for you? And then using that information to infer if you wanted to fully automate a house, going beyond the concept of there's an actual machine that runs the house for you, so you don't actually have to do anything, so that it is completely climate controlled essentially without the use of someone turning on or turning off things. So half of the idea with uncomfortable homes is also that it's reliant on someone taking action. So if a home doesn't come with the concept of, which I know a few people here would have heard from other people, almost like a building manual, that at certain times of the day you need to open your windows or you need to turn on the ceiling fans or close your blinds or things like that, that the home itself can do all of that for you.
Brilliant. Well, that's some exciting stuff that could be possible and potentially will be possible. So looking forward to your future work. Could you all join me in thanking both Alice and also Pia, and also Alex, who's not here. Really appreciate all of you being part of this conversation. So thank you very much.